Okay, to review, we've talked about on day one ATP, right? That molecule that is sort of the energy cache of the cell, and that is the goal when you break down your food into sugars, is to convert those sugars into ATP. Then we answered the question, where does glucose come from? The answer to that was, of course, photosynthesis. You refreshed your memory on how to balance equations, which in this case was fairly easy, just a 6, a 6, and a 6 next to everything but glucose. And that sucker's balanced, which tells us it takes 6 carbon dioxides and 6 waters to make just 1 glucose. And then we talked about how chlorophyll's electrons are kind of like your hyperactive little brother, in that when sunlight hits them, they get all messed up and crazy, and then they get carried from what we call the light-dependent reactions, where the electrons get excited, to the light-independent reactions, where that energy of those electrons is used to build glucose. Today, we answer the question, how do we do that thing where we make glucose into ATP? So yeah, go ahead and write that question down. And the answer to that question is cell respiration, which is the topic of chapter 9. Again, we're not going deep at all. I just want you to get kind of the overview and which sets of reactions it's made up of. The overview is what you're doing is converting the energy stored in glucose into more usable energy in ATP. Remember, ATP is that molecule, adenosine triphosphate, that has 3 phosphates. But the third one really doesn't want to be there. And will pop off and release a little bit of energy whenever you want it to. Since you guys had so much fun balancing that equation yesterday, we're going to balance one more. You ready? Yeah, here we go. So this is the equation for cell respiration. Remember, you've basically got blanks to the left of every molecule that you can put whole numbers in to make the numbers of atoms equal on each side. Carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. That's all you got to deal with. I'll give you about 3 minutes to balance this one. Did you need all your math skills to balance this one? No, you really just needed to look at the page before, didn't you? So I'm going to explain. Tristan, explain why. Why was this so easy? It's the same thing as photosynthesis, just flipped around. Take what's on the left of the arrow and switch it with what's on the right of the arrow, and you have exactly the same equation as photosynthesis. So we balance it exactly the same. We put a 6 next to everything that's not glucose, right? Balance the carbons, 6 and 6. Balance the hydrogens, 12 and 12. And then we wind up with 18 over here. So we want 18 over here, so we put a 6 there. That's it. Now think about what that means. So the answer to that question, which I didn't put up here, is that the reactants of one are the products of the other. They're the same thing, just flips. However you need to write that down, you should write that down. So yeah, they basically feed into each other, these two sets of reactions, photosynthesis and cell respiration. Just like photosynthesis was made of 2 subsets of reactions, light dependent and light independent, cell respiration has 3. There's 3 sub reactions in the way you break your glucose down. And they are called glycolysis, where glucose is actually split in 2. Then you send the 2 pieces of glucose through a process called the Krebs cycle, where they get broken down even further back into carbon dioxide, and that's where the carbon dioxide comes from. You get a little bit of ATP from each of these 2 steps, and then the third step, you've been making little babysitter molecules in these 2 steps that you send through what's called the electron transport chain. And that's where you get most of your ATP. I'm going to put a little note next to these things just to describe them briefly since we're not going any deeper. Okay, so a little note here that glycolysis splits glucose and makes 2 ATP. Krebs cycle makes 2 ATP as well and generates CO2. The electron transport chain is your big money maker here. This is the one where you get 32 ATP out per glucose that goes through the system. Questions? That's almost it. I want to put one more thing in here just to make sure there's no confusion because, boy, a lot of people don't know this. All right, with the understanding that photosynthesis is how you use the sun and CO2 to make sugar, and cell respiration is how you break sugar down to get ATP, fill in the blanks. Not in your notes yet. Let's make sure we have the right answers before we write it in notes. Somebody fill in the blanks for me.
1, plant.
Good, correct. How about that second blank?
Animal.
Incorrect. Or correct, but not completely correct. All living things. Armani, you agree? Yeah. Including plants. So, write it this way. Plants and some bacteria, in parentheses, do photosynthesis. All organisms, including plants, all organisms, including plants, do cell respiration. Plants do photosynthesis. All organisms, including plants, do cell respiration. Yeah, plants make their own food. They still have to get the ATP from that food. Right? Great, you make glucose. Now you got to break it down to get ATP out of it. And so they're doing both, which kind of means that plants rule, right? Like they're the only ones who can live on this planet without anybody else. We need plants for our food. They don't need us. They don't need our CO2 that we breathe out. They make their own. You can put a plant in an airtight dome, as long as the light's getting in and it's got enough water to begin with, and oxygen and CO2 to begin with, it will live indefinitely because it's doing both of these processes. All right, that's probably good. I'm going to trust you that you remember that your guided reading is due next Wednesday.